All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here. My name's Scott Welch. I'm the president of the Petaluma Gap Wine Alliance and also the grower chair. So one of the great things about my job is I get to plan these grower seminars, come up with new ideas. We try to do 3 a year, so this is our first one of 2024. Hard to believe. We're already into March, but here we are. And so first and foremost, I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Mechanics Bank. Our Mark or Debbie here? I don't see him, no? Okay, well, this, I believe, is their 6th or 7th year of being our presenting sponsor. So thank you, Mechanics Bank, for your continued support. Then I'd also like to thank Lumo, VineView for becoming members of the PGWA and co-sponsoring this event today as well. We're a small organization, so your guys' support is much appreciated, and we're excited to learn from both of you today. I'd also like to thank the team here at McAvoy Ranch, especially Samantha Dorsey and Jason McCall. I wasn't here for the setup yesterday, but from what I heard from Cheryl, it went phenomenally, so that's great. Not always the case, and as all of you can see today, we're in a very special spot. It's beautiful, love the venue, and it looks spectacular. So thank you guys for your help and your hospitality. I'd also like to thank Lisa Brayton and Joan Griffin, Cheryl's partners in crime. This is a team effort, organizing, the logistics, getting everything here. And so thank you guys very much. Now, with that being said, let's get started. I know 2024 is feeling a little bit like Groundhog Day. We're repeating 2023 with how much rain we've seen here in the Gap, which after the 4 or 5 years before that is, much welcomed, and we're excited. But I think as a group of growers, we know where we live, where we farm, and we know Petaluma is not always like this. So for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been involved with Jackson Family Wines Ranch, East Petaluma, in the Adobe, Eli area, and I know the challenges, and all of you have probably been farming in those areas even longer than me, and we know that water is not always as easy and guaranteed as it is this year. And so this talk today is going to, be focused in on new irrigation technologies and technologies that can help us be more efficient and better in the future. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get going with the slides. But Raul, if you want to start me off, is that slide 1 or is there? Yeah, I think back a little further. One more. There we go. I have to introduce you guys. I can't jump that one. So we're joined today by Raul Pena from VineView and Ernie Wilson from Lumo. I'm Scott. Next slide. Okay. So as I mentioned before, we're here to learn about some new technologies. And I don't know about you guys, but I love trialing new things. We have 300 acres in the Gap, so we're always looking for new technologies to try out. Typically, we start small, work our way up. Sometimes things stay small based on some of the challenges. Some technologies are way too complicated, and so if it's not easy to use, it's really easy for that app to be moved over to a different page, or if you're getting reports, you're putting them under something else. And so, it gets overly complicated and it doesn't get used, or maybe you find something's unreliable. If you're not trusting what you're hearing about or the reports you're being given, if there's no trust, there's not going to be any continuity with that technology. Cost is a big one. I know right now many of us are trying to sell grapes, find home for our grapes. So if anything we're adding to our farm system is an increased cost, that is a challenge. But there are ways to make that happen. There are ways to integrate that, and that's what we're here to learn about. Poor support, this is a big pet peeve of mine, and sadly sometimes we're forced to deal with this, and even though we continue with technologies, the support doesn't get better. So those are a few of the real big issues that I personally have seen with new technologies, and we're going to learn how that doesn't always have to be the case. So next slide, Raul. Yeah, and I kind of covered these, but simplicity, empowerment, accountability, those, those are the pillars. That's what we're expecting. And so I covered those already, but we're going to get more in depth into those pillars as we run through both technologies today. Next slide. All right, and this is one I feel really hits home to the Petaluma Gap. When should we irrigate? We're in a wet year, we're blessed with these clay soils, nice water holding capacity. We're flushing out a lot of the reclaimed water that we've been using over the past few years. So in a year like this, irrigating is, it's on the back burner. We're good till, May, June, maybe even July. So that's awesome. But then when we're not getting 25 inches of rain and we're back with our 7, 8, 9 inches of rain, when do you start irrigating? When do you, find that that's the best time to go? And it's a huge question because most of us too also aren't dealing with large wells or freshwater ponds. We're buying our water from the city of Petaluma, or we have a scarce amount of water that we're allowed to use. So the question of when do we irrigate becomes that much more important. And you also don't want to waste any of that because, like I said, water's expensive and we're adding salts to the soil. So the precision becomes to the utmost importance in our systems here in Petaluma. So, and at the end of the day, if we're balancing how much we're irrigating and when we irrigate, hopefully we're keeping our costs in control and we're seeing a balanced vine. We don't want a vine that's overly vigorous. We also don't want a vine that looks like 2021 or 2022, where we're not going to be able to sustain, our yields and our return. So those are the questions and the answers that we need to look for when we're trying to implement new technologies in the vineyard. Next slide, Raul. So how do we get there? I'm going to pass the mic off and let these two guys discuss that. So once again, thank you all for being here. Raul, take it away.
Good morning. I had the pleasure of meeting the Charles family already, and Mr. Sweet, a few others from GFW, so welcome, and hope to meet the rest of you later today. My name is Raul Pena, and besides the fact I push buttons a lot, my job today is really to share with you some of the advantages that we feel at VineView will help you to create some new opportunities to identify issues and resolve them using the latest technology that we have developed. So I'll start with a little bit of background. We have been in business for 22 years, so believe it or not, we're kind of a best kept secret. We actually fly our aircraft. We have Cessna aircraft flying out of a hangar in Angwin, which is not too far away from here. And we've been doing this primarily throughout California. However, we also fly in France. We have an aircraft there, and we fly all over the finest vineyards throughout France, although I'm sure they're not quite as good as the one here in Petaluma. Our interest really today is to make sure that you know that we recognize that the importance of knowing exactly what's going on with your irrigation is critical. And we want to make sure that you also know that one of our keys here is helping you with timing, making sure that you have the amount of water that you need exactly when you need it, and also to identify problem areas so you can address them right away. Now, part of what we've done is we've actually taken a scientific approach. Our founders, who founded the company 22 years ago, still with the company, are basing everything on a science-based approach. For example, Matt Stade and Melissa Stade, husband and wife. Matt is from NASA and JPL, developed a lot of the science from those technologies to map the surface of the moon, and literally flipped that around and said, let's try to do that terrestrially. So what you're going to find today is everything's based on science. So you all know what crop coefficient is, and what we do is we try to take the information and try to make sure that we take what's a reference and we try to use actual data to correlate that information. And then we translate that into an algorithm that ties back to the evapotranspiration, which really has more to do with what's going on in terms of the water vapor and what you need to do to recapture and make sure that you have enough water to compensate for water loss. By the way, I should also mention that I failed to do this. We've been joined today by a couple of the team members from VineView. I've got our product manager, Max Turner, here with us, and also Patrick Riggs, who has been advising us viticulturally. He's from Jack Neal and Sons. So we have a lot of experts here as well if you have any questions. So let's talk a little bit about the traditional ways we do things now. And this has been historical. You're familiar with the crop coefficient checklist or chart. And what happens here is that you don't have the ability to account for specific crop variations, whereas with the VineView solution, we do have the ability to do that. You do not account for varied management practices, but we're able to handle varied management practices. So no two vineyards are the same, and we're trying to be accustomed to that. And then third is that it does not account for varietal or trellis type. We know a lot of variations there. With our solution, we are able to have specific algorithms that tie back to exactly what your unique situation might be. A second option is the most costly, which is labor intensive. We're looking here at how you go about doing your on-site calculations, whereas in our solution, with the aircraft that we utilize and the technology we have, there is no field work required. It's time consuming, whereas we fly based on, the timing is always based on your needs, the best quality of weather, and so on. So time reduction is very important. And then you have, in the case of labor intensity, you have very minimal data points, whereas in our case, we cover entire vineyards, entire blocks, and even sub-block data. So you can get really good, detailed information. And then lastly, the issue of low resolution from satellites. Satellites have their place. However, what you find is that you have very minimal pixel accuracy, whereas in our case, we have up to 15 centimeters of accuracy, about 7 inches. So you can actually get very good data and get that in a way that you can make some actionable decisions. Timing is also critical. In the case of satellites, you have the case where they fly on a regular basis, but dependent upon the weather, clouds, and so on, whereas we fly only when you need us to fly. So we will have the aircraft fly either on a schedule that we predetermine with you, or if you make changes, if you prefer that we delay a flight or do it sooner, we can make those adjustments. And then you've all heard of NDVI. That's been a standard for many years. We've chosen to go with a more advanced version. It's called Enhanced Vigor Index, or EVI. EVI is more accurate because it's not affected by atmospheric conditions or time of day. So it's consistent regardless of time of day. And then finally, what you see here is a depiction of what you will see and how we deliver the data. The data is delivered either on the web or on a mobile app. So on your phone, your iPad, in the field, off. You don't even have to be on the network. You can actually see your blocks and the sub-blocks. And sub-blocks can be differentiated even by varietal. So you have the ability to be able to get data that's very specific to the area that you're most concerned about. And you can make adjustments accordingly. So, what does this all mean? Well, first of all, the whole idea is planning. We talked about earlier about the plan. The plan is based on your having the ability to make sure that you don't overwater or underwater. That's the ultimate bottom line. But in order for you to make sure that that's working, we also have a thermal capability to be able to then, with that imagery, you can determine whether or not you have any kind of leaks or clogs, so you can identify those problems and go fix them. As a result of that, you can then validate, and you'll hear more about validation from Lumo. The idea that when you have multiple flights, we recommend a flight a month, you can actually see the evolution of your crops, so that if you have anything going on in May, in June, July, you can see how that's evolved. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lumo. Ernie?
Hi, everybody. My name is Ernie Wilson. I'm the sales manager for Lumo. I've been with Lumo for about 3 months. Prior to working at Lumo, I worked for Thule. Some of you guys might be familiar with Thule. Similar to VineView, that was more on decision-making side of the equation, and now I'm with Lumo, so we're more on the execution side, right? Thule and VineView, they're going to help you decide when and how much to irrigate, and then when it's time to irrigate, you're going to need either labor or you're going to need a automation solution that's going to be opening and closing your valves and irrigating your vineyards. So we're going to start with a little show and tell, I guess you can say. I'm going to pass this around. You guys can play with this. This is our Lumo 1 valve, and this is the first smart valve for irrigation, and I will explain what I mean by smart valve in a second here. You can stay on this slide. Oh, you can go back. So the valve that's being passed around, that was launched last year. So last year was really our first year in production. We were working with some growers in 2021, but it was more on a previous beta version of our valve and software. I'll tell you really quickly kind of the story of how we got started. I think it's pretty interesting. Unfortunately, Devin, our CEO, he's not here to tell the story, but I'll tell it for him. So Devin is our co-founder, and he has a background in technology, and I guess you can say tech or Silicon Valley tech. And he sold his company to Yelp, and he moved out of San Francisco, and he purchased a small ranch over in Occidental, planted an orchard, and had to learn how to irrigate. And when he was doing that, he was having a lot of problems. He was dealing with leaks. He was, all of a sudden, he'd have no water for his house. All these things he was learning on the fly, and he was racking his brains. He was pulling his hair out, and if you've seen Devin, he's got really long hair. So he started talking to some of his neighbors, a lot of wine grape growers, and starting to ask them for advice. And coming from a tech background, he thought, man, this is way too manual. There must be some sort of automation solution for this. And he thought for sure he was going to find some sort of standard answer, but he couldn't. Everybody was working with different technologies. Some people had tried automation and wound up just not having good results and unplugging their automation, their automated valves, and going back to opening and closing them manually. So he thought, I think he had a little time on his hands, and he thought, this is really interesting. I need to know more about this. So he actually went and got a job with Redwood Empire Vineyard Management and became an irrigator. And he worked under with Tyler Click. Some of you guys may know him. And so Tyler was really one of our first advisors. And so Devin was sought out to build a better automation solution. But he didn't know how to build it. And so he started imploring his VC circles to see if there was anybody that knew anything about irrigation. And he wasn't getting a lot of traction, except for one guy, and his name is Henry, and he's our co-founder. And Henry is a bit of, we call him a water wizard. He holds about 35 patents to his name. I think maybe it's 36 now, because we actually, our Lumo valve is just patented as of last week. But Henry did something very similar in residential and commercial applications, plumbing applications. He built a smart valve called Flow, and some of you guys may have seen this at Home Depot. You may see the commercials on TV. So it was an automated valve for residential applications that was helping detect leaks in homes. And he wound up selling it to Moen. He went into retirement, and then Devin coaxed him out of retirement, and he helped us build the Lumo valve. And so this, like I said, it's the first and only smart valve for irrigation. And we'll get into a slide in a second here where I'll explain exactly what that means. If you guys are passing that around, go ahead and unscrew those unions there, and you can actually look in there and see the flow meter. So what does Lumo allow you to do? It allows you to, one, automate your irrigation, right? But other solutions can do that, right? But we're going to allow you to do it very reliably, explain how. And it's going to help you detect leaks. It's going to help you detect clogged filters. It can help you understand your distribution uniformity. It can help you with pump issues. It's going to be able to do that because of one of the things that makes it smart. It has a built-in flow meter. And lastly, it's just going to allow you to irrigate with a lot more ease and precision. So why now? Why is Lumo so important right now? There's a lot of things that Lumo can help you with, but our core value proposition to growers really is that we're going to help you save on labor costs, right? Scott can probably attest to this. I had a conversation with a grower in Napa the other day, and I couldn't believe it when he said it. He said he puts like 4,500 miles on his truck during the summer months, driving from ranch to ranch, turning on and closing valves. That is a colossal waste of gas and time, but it's necessary. He doesn't have any way else to do it, right? And so Lumo's really going to be able to help you save on labor, and labor is super important right now because we know that it's only getting more scarce and more expensive, right? And especially with the overtime regulation now, if you're trying to put on a 10-hour or 12-hour set, well, you're going to have to pay somebody overtime to go and close that valve, right? You're not going to have to if you have it automated. Go ahead, next slide. So these are just a few of the ways that we're going to help growers, and there's a lot of other benefits to working with us, but these are kind of just a few of the ways. You're going to save a lot of time with automating your irrigation schedules, right? Whether that's the viticulturist who's doing the irrigation scheduling or the irrigator, right? We're not going to take the irrigator's job completely, but we're going to free up his time to do other important things on the ranch. You're going to save money with fewer labor hours. What's another way you can save money? Well, if you're irrigating overnight, let's say, right, you can save on runtime expense, right? Energy expenses. And then you're also going to be able to do more precision irrigation. I remember when I worked at Thule, you would have a irrigation schedule where one block, when it needed 4 hours, one needed 6, one needed 8. It's pretty hard to pull off when you have somebody running around doing other things, right? So your irrigator would struggle to be able to pull off that sort of precision, right? We're certainly going to help you with leak detection, right? We're protecting some of your most valuable assets, your water supply, your pumps. You can really increase yield and quality with precision irrigation. You're going to get data that's going to allow you to make more informed decisions. A use case that came up recently, one of our customers looks at our data to understand whether they're having distribution uniformity issues, right? And they can really target where they need to, what lines they need to clean and run acid through by looking at the flow data. And lastly, you're going to get a lot of goodwill from investing in sustainability technology, right? And this is an important initiative to a lot of growers, something that they like to highlight. For instance, Treasury is one of our customers, and they put Lumo front and center of one of their sustainability campaigns right now. So let me explain to you guys the valve a little bit, right? It's an all-in-one solution. Well, what does that mean? Well, you don't see any wires sticking out. There is a wire that connects for the solar panel and the router, but you're not running cable to power these things. There is one of the things that makes it a smart valve is that it has a built-in computer, right? So if you have, let's say, 10 blocks in your vineyard, all of these valves talk to each other via a Wi-Fi mesh network, right? But what happens if there's some sort of connectivity failure, right? Whether it's all 10 are offline or maybe just one of them is offline. Well, one, how are you going to know about it? We're going to know about it because we have remote diagnostics that can tell us whether it's online or not. But two, if it happens in a pinch and you've already scheduled an irrigation, that irrigation lives on the valve. And so if it's a heat event and there's, I don't know, what causes a connectivity failure, a solar flare, I don't know. The valve is still going to open and close and execute that irrigation. That'll be $599, please. Um, sold. Yeah, give the flow meter a spin there, right? So the reliability aspect is very important, right? Connectivity is not going to be an issue with the Lumo valve. The irrigation schedule lives on the valve. You can also still irrigate manually with a Lumo valve. There's a button on the top there. When you hold that button for 4 seconds, the valve will open and it'll still capture that irrigation data. And then it has the built-in flow meter. So those are really the two things that are making this a smart valve, right? And that's part of our patent is that we have a built-in flow meter on a pilot valve. And so that flow data is going to be crucial to, one, understanding that you're irrigating, right? Just because you sent a command to a controller-based valve you don't know for sure if you're irrigating. And two, it's going to tell you how well you're irrigating, right? Just because the valve's open and there's water flowing doesn't mean that you're putting on the amount of water that you intend to be putting on. So we're going to come back and look at some of the data in a second here, right? But we're still on kind of that execution piece. We're not yet to validation. So in order to execute, you got to also be able to have that software component where you can log onto your computer, log onto your phone, and you can put together an irrigation schedule and then monitor the irrigation. We're not going to look at a video here, but if you guys afterwards, if you come up to the table behind you, actually have a demo that shows you exactly how the irrigation scheduling software works. But it's super easy to use. You'll notice there's not a lot of bells and whistles on our site, on our platform. That is intentional. We kind of stay in our lane. Super easy to execute an irrigation schedule. And then something else that really differentiates us from other scheduling tools and other irrigation automation solutions is because it has a built-in flow meter, you can actually irrigate based on volume instead of just runtime. So for instance, if you wanted to put on 5 gallons per vine and you have 2 half-gallon emitters, you might assume that means you need to run your system for 1 hour. But what if your flow rate is only 50% of where it should be? It'll then close the valve after 10 hours to make sure that you put on 10 gallons per vine. Scott touched on this a little bit, but support is very important for Lumo. I mentioned that we have diagnostics that can tell us whether the battery is let's say the battery is starting to die, or potentially let's say that the valve is leaking, right? I need to circle back and tell you guys what kind of valve it is in a second here, but our flow data would see that. When we see any of those issues, we're on top of it. We come out and we service the valve for you. So you don't have to worry about something going wrong and having to figure out how to even know if something's going wrong, and you have to figure out how to fix it. That's all included in our service cost. Circling back here on the valve itself, it is a standard, this is our 2-inch valve. We also have a 4-inch valve. Most of you probably won't need a 4-inch valve. But the valve itself is a standard diaphragm valve, but the opening and closing mechanism is not a latching solenoid valve. It is a three-way motorized valve, or called a worm drive. So it actually opens and closes the valve slowly, and that makes it less susceptible to issues of water hammer or over time hard water deposits causing that plunging mechanism in a solenoid to maybe start sticking and not closing all the way. You're not going to have those types of issues with Lumo valves. And like I said, if it was leaking, we're going to know about it. You're going to see it as well in the flow data. You're not going to be able to know that just by having if you have a leaking solenoid valve, unless you're actually out there, right? And just one more thing about the support. Lumo only works in the North Coast right now, and as well as Livermore, and that is by design. We will not expand out of this area unless we're able to support the region. So we had somebody from Okanagan in British Columbia reach out to us, but it's not something that we can do right now because we can't support it. So let's talk now how we can actually help with the validation part, right? What we're looking at here, this is Clos de Val, the Hirondelle ranch they have, their estate ranch at the winery right there in Stag's Leap. So this is September 13th of last year, and it's going to show you all the irrigations that occurred on that date. And you'll notice that all these irrigations occurred at night, right? You'll also notice that they all occurred at 1 a.m. That's kind of important when we look at the flow data in a second here. You can go next. So that Ryan Decker is their viticulturist. He scheduled 4 irrigations that night, and you can see the blocks that he scheduled them in. And then you can see what the status was of that irrigation that occurred, right? So it's either, you can go back, it's either going to say normal or irregular. So what does normal mean? Normal means that it's within an acceptable range of flow. That's a customizable range, but out of the box, it's 20% plus or minus where it should be. So we're going to know what the flow rate should be based on vine count, emitter spacing, emitter rate, etc. If it's irregular, well, that means that you have a problem, and we're really quickly highlighting that you need to look at that data, right? Next. We're going to tell you what volume was applied. So Ryan does volume-based application, uses Lumo for volume-based application. So you can see that these top 2 here, they got pretty much exactly what they need, just a little bit short of 5 1/4 gallons. Whereas these 2 at the bottom, well, 1 didn't get anything, so that's something that you're going to need to look into. Perhaps maybe a ball valve was shut for some reason. And then the one at the bottom, it was irrigated, but it just wasn't irrigated enough. So we can then drill down and look at that flow data and see exactly what's going on. So this is what the flow data looks like. We call this flow vision. And so you can see here on the left here, this is gallons per minute, and this is time on the bottom. So this gray line here is what the expected gallons per minute is. And you can see at first this initial spike is just because the lines are pressurizing, and then they settle in, and then you can see what the flow looks like over time, right? So it's normal. We call this normal, or it's where you would expect it to be, right? This is what you want to see. Whereas this block E, you can see it's a little bit lower, right? Not terrible, but it's not optimal, right? And so this is something that you should be paying attention to, because now you're not putting on as much water as you intend to be. And again, we're going to go back to this notion that he was irrigating all at 1 a.m., right? Go ahead. And so this is a comparison. We have a compare feature where you can actually compare all the current irrigation to all previous irrigations. And you can see just a month prior, his flow rate was a lot higher. In this block, what we found was that his filters were clogging. And so this is going to help him understand that it's time to change the filter. I also suspect that this might have been because he was running too many blocks concurrently, and his pump just wasn't able to keep up with the demand. So we're looking at a few different examples here of that flow data and some of the things we can show the grower in real time. We're looking back now, but if you guys had a Lumo, you can actually on your phone in real time see what the flow is, see how the irrigation is doing. So this is an example again of a good irrigation over at Pine Ridge. Next, different vineyard, different ranch. Same grower, but this is an example. This is something you're going to want to know about right away. I've been here for 3 months, so I wasn't here when this was happening. But if I saw this happening, I'd want to stop that irrigation right away. You can stop an irrigation right away if you see something like this on Lumo. But in this example, he had an issue with his pressure regulator on his pressure tank, which was causing his pump to turn on and off inadvertently. And so we helped him identify an issue that he was able to fix, and then the flow returned to normal. Next. This is what you don't want to see, especially in the middle of the night. and this is in the middle of the night. He started this irrigation at 10 p.m. Again, I'm looking at this and thinking, why didn't they just turn it off right away? But this was a leaking air vent, right? And so it caused the flow to be a lot higher than it should have been, right? One thing I'm not showing you guys in this presentation is that you will get alerts, again, in real time. If we see this happening, you're going to be getting a text message. You're going to see it on the dashboard, and it's going to be alerting you to an issue that could potentially be happening. And that's it for me, guys. Thanks.
So what you just saw is a great tool, and part of the reason that we're doing this presentation jointly is because of the fact that the data that we provide, the information that we have for planning, the fact that you have the ability to identify problems as they crop up, is that we want to be able to then give you the ability to execute. And executing with a company like Lumo allows you to do that. So that's part of the reason we wanted to share this presentation with them. What you see here is an example of the kind of data we at VineView would provide to you every month. So in effect, when we create a map or we create an image for you, we actually have it based on the EVI data I mentioned earlier, and it's designed to also track with your vine spacing. So literally, we will have a dot on the map that correlates with the vine in the row. So technically speaking, you're going to have a virtual vineyard depicted for you, and you can see specifically where the issues arise. As you see here in each month is going to be a little bit of a variation, so it gives you a chance to check for uniformity, to see if there's any variations that you need to adjust for. So that month-by-month comparison is really, I like to use the analogy, it's kind of like a movie. You get to see, instead of just a snapshot, you see the evolution over time. The other thing that's nice about the data that we provide in advance so that you can make decisions like with the Lumo solution is that you have statistical data. For those of you who like to see the analytics, the numbers, it gives you the opportunity to see where performance is happening within the vineyard and where you have outliers or you have low performance. So it gives you an idea of the order of magnitude, so you have the ability to make some adjustments. And ultimately, we find that a lot of what we do in irrigation and also just in overall management of the vineyard is that we give you insight for yield estimation. So it gives you a whole lot of insight that you would not normally have at a glance. And then finally, just to reiterate, when we do fly throughout the season, we do have the ability to identify problems using our thermal technology. So that gives you just another way of prevention or identifying problems before they become bigger problems. So with that, I wanted to make sure that I thank you all for being here and for the time you've taken out of your day. VineView is a company that is very interested in customer support, as you heard earlier from Lumo. We pride ourselves on availability and having resources available to you. So the team, for example, that's here today, they're all available to you if you have questions or consultation, be it viticultural, be it about the product itself. So with that, I'll give it back to Scott. Thank you.
Thanks, Raul. Thanks, Ernie. That was a great presentation. At this point in time, I was going to open up the seminar to Q&A. If anyone has any questions, I think the acoustics in here are pretty good, so fire away.
My question's for Ernie. With your Lumo valves, does that only work on pressurized systems, or do you have hardware that talks back to pumps to turn on and off?
We have pump automation in our R&D right now. We're actually testing it on a few vineyards right now, in both electric and diesel pumps.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So for the time being, pressurized systems or with pressure tanks.
Yeah, but the actual the data we were looking at from the Hirondale Ranch, the Clodoval Ranch, that's he still has to manually turn on and off the pump, but he's saving a ton of time, not having to turn it on and off the valves, and not to mention he's being able to be more precise and deliberate with his timing of irrigations. So I would say maybe the sweet spot is certainly going to be a pressurized system or a VFD. but in the future, we're certainly going to have a automation solution for pumps. But then again, I think most people are aspiring to get to the point where they have a VFD. There are limitations, right? If you're out in the hinterlands and you can't get the power out there, so.
And Ernie, real quick, I just wanted to expand on that. If you are on a larger vineyard and you're working with a non-VFD and you have a number of Lumo valves, the way that if there is an issue, the Lumo is designed to kind of close up and not cause any issues to the main line. The way that the valves close themselves, correct? It does so in a friendly way or an easy way.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. You're going to have the ability to turn off that valve right away, but yeah, if there are sustained issues, it's going to turn off automatically. It's going to catch that.
Yeah, and I guess it's just if you have, so my thought was if you have, a diesel engine motor working pretty hard, if there was an issue, it would shut down or it would communicate to you very clearly that there was an issue.
Sure.
Rather than, being at risk of, wasting a lot of water or causing an issue to the main line.
Right, and when we have the pump automation, you'll be able to turn the pump off as well.
Right. Okay. All right. Dan?
Yeah, great presentations from you guys, great technology, really compelling products. I've got a question about this notion of the evapotranspirative coefficient, and this is really more probably for Raul and Scott. So in a growing region like Petaluma Gap, where the winds are so intense, what does that do to the calculation or the modeling of this coefficient, and how do you, if you can hold other factors constant?
Yeah, I can answer that. So wind definitely can. Oh, thank you. Hello? I know. So maybe I'll give a bit of background on what we're doing there. So basically, we were correlating our canopy data to the Paso panel method. So if there is wind during that day, we would notice like a little bit of difference, but because the canopy was static over time, generally in that period when we were imaging, we were able to get a decent correlation. So during that period, it should be okay, but the wind, definitely could be an issue.
So over time, would you, by trial and error, need to arrive at a different coefficient so that you could?
Yeah, so
I think, isn't it that the evapotranspiration would be higher if you had more wind? So the coefficient stays the same, but the evapotranspiration is different, and therefore your irrigation need would be different because you have it already included in the.
Yeah, so true, yeah. So just underneath the hood, so we're getting the crop coefficient value, and that value is part of an equation that calculates actual evapotranspiration. And part of that equation, it's basically crop coefficient times the regional evapotranspiration equals the actual evapotranspiration of the field in question. So we're able to, what we do kind of underneath the hood is we scrape data from that regional area during that point in time, the weather data, and then we include it in that equation to create the evapotranspiration value for your specific block or sub-block.
So the actual thing that's happening in the block or the vineyard or the region that they're experiencing is captured in this coefficient.
Yeah.
Based on your analysis.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And the crop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think Raul mentioned that we have, when we did field trials, we have separate kind of underneath the hood equations for different varietals and different trellis types, so we can get a more accurate assessment for each of those different types of different types of fields.
Thanks. Sorry if I drill down a little bit.
Oh no, go ahead. Yeah, no.
That's great.
No.
Great, thanks, Dan. Patrick?
Ernie, a couple of questions for you. So how would you set up the Lumo? So for example, maybe I got a ranch, there's set up, it's one block, but really there's 4 irrigation sets, right? And I have a declining well, right? So at the beginning of the year, maybe the well is 50 gallons a minute, come July and August, it's down at 30. So, and of course it's maybe not 30, right? And the irrigators are literally closing, right? As the output of the well goes down, the sets are getting less rows and become more of them, right? How, would you advise setting up, if you're getting Lumo in that situation, setting it up for the 30 gallons a minute, like the worst case scenario setup? Or, how would we deal with that, right? Because like I said, let's say there's 4 sets, so I would get 4 valves, right? But then that's at my, let's say this year where we're probably not gonna lose well output, but where a drought year maybe, come, like I said, July, that 4 sets is now 6 sets. How do we deal with that? What would be the best scenario for, implementing if I have that situation for, with the auto valves? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and it's a question that we get frequently. And I would say right now the best way to handle that is you would have to probably do a little math. The notion of building in logic that can understand some of those constraints is something that's on our product roadmap. If you had 50 gallons a minute to start with, and it was your well was putting out 30 gallons a minute, are you going to see that in the flow data? Potentially, right? Or 30 might still sustain the flow rate that is expected within the block itself. But if it's not, then you're going to see a lower flow rate in that flow data, and potentially then you'll need to put on smaller sets. Yeah, but there's nothing currently built that would understand that constraint, I would say.
Well, and if I run into that constraint, so then if I'm set up with, let's say, 4 Lumo valves and they're doing, whatever, 10 rows, it doesn't really matter, right? And then that's at, I've done the math, so that's at 50 gallons a minute. If I drop to 30, would I then click open on them and then adjust, still have to, right? Is that how I would?
No, I think what you would do, if as is, to be able to do what you're trying to do, which is to make sure that you're getting as much as you're getting the amount that you're intending to apply, you would set a duration-based irrigation, right? And so, a volume-based irrigation. So again, if you're trying to put on 5 gallons per vine, it would close the valve after 5 gallons is put on.
Nice. Good question, Patrick. Any other questions in the room? Anyone else? Patrick, we were talking earlier, and I wrote down a question for you. You've been using VineView for a long time, and their predecessor, you mentioned, since 2004, I think. Can you tell us some of the ways it's helped you when it comes to irrigation? Any specific examples as well?
Sure. We use it for lots of things, both direct irrigation and then also the subsequent part. So for example, the one easy one is Raul put up I call it the dot to dot. It's the, why is the name escaping me?
Vertical vine. Oh, vine by vine.
The vine by vine, right, is when we are either adding either a redevelopment or adding double poly. I use the NDVI, or use that dot to dot to where to put the emitters, right? Instead of going, well, this might be a weak vine, I don't know, maybe. How do you define a weak vine? Well, every one of us could look at a vine and say, well, is it based on growth? Is it based on the number of canes? Is it based, right? It gives a reference that I can then tell the guys in the field, okay, each one of those dots is a vine. I need you to put an emitter on vine 1, 10, through 12, and then, vine 20 and 25. And then once that's set up, now of course I can irrigate to those weaker vines, and maybe they're weaker for whatever reason, right? Is it soil, or they're just weak, or who knows? then I can deliver fertilizer specifically to those vines to try to get a homogeneous vineyard. So that we've been doing that for forever. I mean, I think every one of my vineyards has the double poly setup. Some are, with the double mains, and some is, just a split at the riser. And we, of course, install them all now when we do a redevelopment. But and then kind of every 5 years, roughly, we'll adjust that, right? Because, of course, ideally, if you've given more water, more fertilizer to those vines, with any luck, they're no longer weak, right? So then you gotta, again, update it and our pattern is like 5 years, right? So that's really straightforward, really easy, right? Like, instead of guessing or having, if I decide it's a weak vine, but the guy or the irrigator or the GL who's actually putting the emitter in, he might have a different view than I am, even if I show him this is the vine I'm talking about, right? Because I think if any 2 or 3 of us went out there and it's a really heterogeneous vineyard, you might say, well, is that weak or not? Or this is weak for me or strong or vice versa. And then, like I said, I can then deliver. Typically what it is we'll start irrigation on those vines earlier. Usually it's soil related. So maybe 1 or 2 weeks earlier, as opposed to irrigating an entire vineyard, right? So I'm saving water by doing that. Now, sometimes you'll hear people say the double poly, I'll irrigate less. That's not necessarily the case. You'll be more precise, right? The vines that need more will get more, and the same with fertilizer, depending on how you're irrigating already, right? So that's the easy one. And then from there, you can do all sorts of stuff, right? Like, I have cultivation maps that are based on, right? So whether it's no-till, half-till, every 3rd row, every 4th row, or full cultivation, I'm using the map, right? And again, that's not directly related to irrigation, but it's the same idea, right? I want to invigorate that area, if I can use the zone map, so that it's more homogeneous across the entire vineyard. Yeah?
Thanks. No, that was a wonderful answer. I think that's something we all find very useful. Any other questions stemming from that? Nice. I had a question, and Patrick kind of alluded to this, but Max, Raul, you guys have quite a few products. Patrick just alluded to one. I know we at Jackson Family have used others. Would you mind elaborating on some of the other product services you offer?
Yes, we have just rolled out several new products this year. One in particular that's really gotten a lot of attention, and I have brochures back on our table if you're interested, is the RTK pinpoint device. It's a handheld device that allows you to walk through the vineyard and make notations using basically the click of a button. You can designate for whatever it is you're looking for and track very thoroughly each vine in the row. And since I have the expert here with me, I'm going to let him elaborate. So, Max, would you?
Yeah, so we're entering the hardware business a bit with the RTK unit. So the idea is that this is going to be a unit that talks directly to the VineView app. So if you're wanting to create your own map with this really, really high precision RTK accuracy, which, by the way, uses satellite correction when you're on the field, so you don't have to worry about service or whatever. You're going to have that up to 3 centimeter accuracy for each vine. Then you're able to go out, program. We have 3 buttons that we've assigned, manual buttons. Program those. Let's say you want to do a production map. So we're going to go rootstock, missing, present. You can go out and map that entire vineyard and then have that as that point in time. And then you can build upon that year over year, month over month, and create these really powerful historical maps that give you a time series at that level of accuracy. So those will be launching and shipping May of this year. And we'll be adding more software components to that as well in the months following.
And then last but not least, before we have lunch, I wanted to make sure I mentioned that we do have a sampling plan. The sampling plan is available now as part of our offering their standard EVI flights. So there's no additional cost for that. It allows you to be able to identify areas in the vineyard that help you designate sampling areas that would be recommended to you as opposed to random sampling or doing it manually. And then finally, we also have developed a missing vine product. Ideally, it's done, those flights are be done early in the season prior to a lot of growth. We go on the basis of the shadows of the actual vine, so you can actually make some determinations for yield estimation, determining whether you may have some areas that are, if you have gaps and so on. So just an example, I'd invite you to look at our website at vineview.com. And of course, my business cards are available if you'd like to contact us for further. So thank you.
Thanks, Raul. Ernie, I had one more question for you. Lumo, new company, irrigation automation has been around for a long time. I mean, I can remember early 2000s when I first got into the industry. It being around, it hasn't been widely adopted. Why do you think that is?
There's two reasons I would point to, but I would say that the main reason is really that reliability and trust, right? Some of you may have experimented with valve automation before. You might still be using something out there, but as I said earlier, you know, when Devin was doing his discovery about this industry, he noticed a lot of unplugged controllers out in the field, or you'll notice a lot of, you know, electric latching solenoid valves that are installed and they're never actually hooked up to any sort of telemetry or any sort of real automation solution. It's because growers don't trust what's been out there. They don't trust that the water is being put on like when it needs to be turned on, and they also don't have the visibility and the transparency into what's actually happening when those valves are opening and closing. So that's, I think, where we can really make a difference. But then the other issue, I think, is its price. I mean, when you're trying to bring your labor costs down, if you have some, you know, if there's some huge upfront cost to get started, that's going to be a deterrent to ever get started. I mean, and that's why I think there's a lot of, you know, electric valves that are sitting out there that are not even plugged in, right? Because you intended to automate, but then you never found the budget to do it. Getting started with Lumo is actually, our startup costs are substantially lower, and it's just a very easy process. So.
Great, thanks, Ernie. All right, any other questions from the audience? Suzanne?
So I have a very small vineyard, only 7 acres. So and I have 7 blocks. Would I need a valve for each block?
Yes. So it would replace
how much is a valve?
Come up and talk. Yeah, the valve is
Price yet to be
the valve's
disclosed.
$599. Yeah, $599.
Okay.
So there's $599. We have an install fee, and then there's a yearly fee, and that's based on per acre, not per valve. So in your situation, it could be very cost effective.
And I know now's a rough time to talk about funding, but CLSI just closed. But, you know, a note to the group would be keep looking for grant opportunities this year. We as an organization are going to try to get some meetings together for this summer, hopefully before harvest, because those opportunities are going to open back up. So those exist. It's taking advantage of them. California Land Stewardship Institute or group, they have some block grant funding secured for the next year or 2 years. I'm not sure. Ernie, you might know a little more on that. But they've been a great partner to work with, and it's a lot easier working with them than going through the CDFA website. And that whole side of it has kind of been put to a halt, whereas CLSI, I know they just are closing this week, but they went through with all their applicants. So we haven't heard who's been rewarded, but we'll be hearing back on that for this year, and hopefully that continues. So that's another thing to think about if you're planning on redeveloping blocks, revising your irrigation systems, how to make that work, and it's definitely within grasp. Ernie?
Yeah, SWEEP gives money for irrigation and energy efficiency upgrades. It's definitely something to take advantage of. It would pay for something like Lumo, or if you aspire to retrofit your pump, install solar, you should take advantage of it. Applying directly through CDFA can be daunting. The application process, if you've never gone through it before, you might feel like you need some guidance, and you might have to work with a grant writer. But now they've introduced what they call block grant recipients. There's only one block grant recipient in the North Coast, and that's the California Land Stewardship Institute. Some of you guys may know them as fish-friendly farming. But they will kind of shepherd you through the whole process. They, like Scott mentioned, they just closed this year's application window, but I think they'll have some more next year. And they also have one for what's called a Healthy Soils Grant. So you should definitely look them up and talk to them and see if they can help you with funding.
Awesome. Yeah, nice points, Ernie. Well, good. Any final questions before we conclude? Well, I don't see any hands. Well, thank you, Raul. Thank you, Ernie. This has been a great conversation, and thank all of you for being here and taking some time out of your day. Appreciate it.